I was standing in the kitchen, balancing two trays at once, when I realized I hadn't sat down even once. 19 guests filled the dining room laughing, clinking glasses, calling my name like it was part of the menu, and I answered every time. My mother was seated comfortably, smiling for photos. My father raised a toast. My sister leaned in to whisper something that made the table erupt in laughter. Then all their eyes turned to me. No one asked if I was tired. No one asked if I had eaten. They spoke about me as if I weren't standing right there. So I smiled. I stayed silent. Because what they didn't know, what none of them suspected, was that this wasn't just another Christmas where I swallowed the humiliation. That night, I wasn't the powerless daughter they loved to belittle. I was the only one at that table who held the truth. And once dinner was over, everything was about to change. I had learned very early in life that in my family, love was conditional and usefulness mattered more than feelings. My name is Emily Carter, and growing up, I was never the loud one, never the favorite, never the child my parents bragged about. That role belonged to my younger sister, Ashley. She was charming, outspoken, and somehow always right, even when she was cruel. I was the responsible one, the one who stayed home, the one who helped without being asked and without being thanked. When my parents talked about family values, they meant obedience. When they talked about sacrifice, they meant mine. After college, I didn't move far. I told myself it was practical, saving money, helping out, but deep down, I knew the truth. I stayed because every time I tried to leave, my mother's voice would soften in that dangerous way. Just until your father's health improves. Just until Ashley settles down. Just until after the holidays. There was always a just until. That Christmas dinner wasn't supposed to be different. It was meant to be another family gathering where I blended into the background, quietly making sure everything ran smoothly while everyone else enjoyed themselves. My mother had announced weeks in advance that we were hosting important guests, friends from church, co-workers, distant relatives I barely knew. 19 people in total. When she said it, she looked straight at me. "You'll help, right?" she asked, already smiling, already assuming my answer. Of course, I said yes. I always did. Ashley, meanwhile, had arrived that morning dressed perfectly, carrying nothing but her phone and a gift bag. She kissed my parents' cheeks, glanced at the kitchen chaos, and smirked. "Wow, Em," she said lightly. "Looks like you're really in your element today." I laughed it off, because that's what I'd been trained to do. By the time the guests started arriving, I had been on my feet for hours. Cooking, setting the table, reheating dishes, refilling drinks. My father sat in the living room telling stories. My mother floated between guests, soaking up compliments. Ashley posed for photos, glass of wine in hand. No one told me to sit. No one asked if I needed help. And still, I told myself it was fine. It was just one night. Just another Christmas. What I didn't realize, what none of them realized, was that this dinner wasn't only exposing how little they valued me. It was also the night I finally stopped confusing silence with weakness. And once that shift happened inside me, there was no going back. By the time the doorbell rang for the third time, my hands already smelled like food and soap mixed together. The oven timer kept beeping, the stovetop was crowded with pots, and the dining table looked picture-perfect, polished, decorated, ready for everyone except me. I moved automatically, like muscle memory had taken over. Plates out, glasses filled, coats taken, smiles offered. "Thank you for coming. Of course, right this way. Wine or sparkling water?" Each guest stepped into the warm living room, greeted by my mother's bright laugh and my father's booming voice. They were praised immediately. "Linda, everything looks amazing. Robert, you always host such lovely dinners." Ashley drifted through the room like she didn't belong to the same household as me. She leaned against the counter, scrolling on her phone, occasionally chiming in with a sarcastic comment that made people laugh. When she noticed me hurrying past with a tray of appetizers, she raised an eyebrow. "Careful, Em," she said loudly. "You wouldn't want to drop anything in front of everyone." A few guests chuckled. I forced a smile and kept walking. When dinner was finally served, I placed the last plate down and instinctively glanced at the table, searching for an empty chair. There wasn't one. Every seat was taken, filled with conversation and clinking silverware. My mother didn't look up. My father was mid-story. Ashley was laughing, her chair pulled comfortably close to the table. "Emily," my mother called without turning around. "Can you bring more bread? And refill Mr. Thompson's glass." I nodded, even though my stomach growled quietly. I hadn't eaten all day. As I moved back and forth between the kitchen and the dining room, snippets of conversation floated toward me. Comments about careers, vacations, successes. Then, softer voices. Whispers that stopped when I passed by. "Is she always this quiet? Poor thing. Still living at home? I guess someone has to help." They weren't saying it to hurt me. That almost made it worse. I stood there, holding a serving spoon, listening to them talk about me like I was part of the furniture, useful, unnoticed, replaceable. My sister leaned in toward one of the guests and whispered something that made them laugh again. I didn't ask what she said. I already knew. I lowered my eyes and kept serving, because that was the role they had written for me. What they didn't know was that every laugh, every whisper, every ignored glance was quietly pushing me toward a line I had never crossed before, and once that line was crossed, there would be no pretending anymore. Dinner stretched on, slow and heavy, like time itself had decided to punish me. The plates emptied, then filled again. Glasses clinked. Someone asked for dessert before I had even cleared the main dishes. "Emily," my father said, finally looking in my direction. "Can you take care of that?" "Not please. Not when you have a moment." Just an assumption spoken the way you'd talk to a task, not a person. "Yes," I answered automatically. As I bent to collect the plates, I felt it then, the shift. Not one big moment, but dozens of small ones stacking on top of each other. A guest didn't move their chair so I could pass. Someone tapped their glass impatiently when I took too long. Another sighed dramatically when I misheard a request. And then my sister spoke again. "Honestly," Ashley said with a soft laugh, loud enough for the table to hear, "Emily loves this stuff. Don't you, Em? You'd be lost without something to do." The laughter that followed wasn't loud. It was worse than that, polite, knowing, comfortable. My mother smiled into her napkin. "Well," she added lightly, "some people are just better suited for supporting roles." No one disagreed. I felt my face burn, but I kept my hands steady. I placed the plates down carefully, afraid that if I moved too fast or spoke too soon, something inside me would crack. I wanted to say something. Anything. I wanted to remind them that I had a degree, that I worked, that I wasn't invisible. But the words stayed trapped in my throat. Instead, I heard myself say, "I'll bring the dessert." As I turned toward the kitchen, another whisper followed me, too quiet to quote, too clear to ignore. More laughter. A few glances exchanged like private jokes. That was when I understood something with painful clarity. This wasn't thoughtless teasing. This wasn't misunderstanding. They knew exactly what they were doing. And for the first time that night, as I stood alone in the kitchen with my hands resting on the counter, I stopped feeling small. I felt alert. Because humiliation only works when the person receiving it believes they deserve it. And I no longer did. Standing alone in the kitchen, I let the noise from the dining room blur into a distant hum. Laughter, cutlery, the low rhythm of people who felt completely safe because they believed they knew exactly where I stood. For a long time I had believed that too. I rinsed my hands slowly, watching the water run clear, and that was when my eyes landed on the small folder tucked into the corner of my bag on the counter. Plain. Unremarkable. Something I carried with me out of habit, not fear. Paper doesn't look powerful. But sometimes, it is. 2 years earlier, my life had briefly taken a turn no one in my family paid attention to. While Ashley was busy building her social life and my parents were focused on appearances, I had been quietly dealing with legal paperwork after my grandmother passed away. She wasn't wealthy in the flashy sense, but she was careful, methodical, and deeply private. And for reasons no one ever bothered to ask about, she trusted me. Not my parents. Not my sister. Me. The arrangement wasn't dramatic. No secret millions. No revenge plot. Just a set of documents that gave me legal authority over a modest but important asset, one that my parents had been assuming for years was theirs to control eventually. They never asked. They never checked. They never imagined I'd be anything other than compliant. I slipped the folder back into my bag and took a deep breath. My heart wasn't racing. It was steady, calm in a way that surprised me. From the dining room, I heard my mother's voice float in. Emily, we're ready for dessert. Not are you ready? Not can you join us? I carried the dessert out, placed each plate carefully in front of the guests, and stepped back again. Still no chair. Still no invitation. Ashley didn't even look up this time. As I stood there, something shifted, not outwardly, not visibly, but fundamentally. For the first time, I wasn't measuring my worth by their reactions. I wasn't waiting for approval or bracing for the next comment. I was counting. Counting the assumptions they had made. Counting how comfortable they felt. Counting how little they knew. My father raised his glass again, making another toast, this one about family, about togetherness, about gratitude. The irony sat heavy in my chest, but it didn't crush me anymore. I smiled softly, the way people do when they've already made a decision. They thought silence meant submission. They thought endurance meant weakness. They thought I had nowhere else to stand. What they didn't understand, what they had never once considered, was that silence can also be preparation. And while they laughed and celebrated, completely unaware, I was no longer asking myself how much more I could take. I was asking myself when it would be time to stop carrying what was never meant to be mine in the first place. Dinner wasn't over yet, but something else already was. I didn't confront them, not then. I moved through the rest of the evening exactly the way they expected me, to quiet, efficient, invisible. I cleared plates while they leaned back in their chairs. I poured coffee while they discussed plans that didn't include me. I nodded when spoken to, smiled when laughed at, and kept my voice calm. Inside, though, everything was different. Each request felt like confirmation. Each careless comment felt like evidence. Emily, could you wrap up some leftovers for the Thompsons? Emily, the trash needs to go out. Emily, don't forget to clean the table before everyone leaves. I answered every time. Of course, no problem. I've got it. Ashley glanced at me once with a satisfied look, the kind that said, see, you know your place. My mother watched approvingly, proud of how smoothly the evening had gone. My father didn't notice me at all. That was fine. Because I wasn't staying silent out of fear anymore. I was staying silent because I was choosing the moment. I needed them relaxed, confident, unprepared. When the guests finally began to leave, coats were gathered, and compliments exchanged. Such a lovely dinner. You're lucky to have such a helpful daughter. My mother beamed. She's always been good like that. I stood by the door, thanking people, listening carefully to every word. No one saw the way my fingers tightened briefly around the edge of the counter. No one noticed how I memorized the room, who said what, who assumed what, who believed I would always be there to clean up after them. Once the door closed behind the last guest, the house went quiet. The kind of quiet that usually meant relief for everyone else, and more work for me. All right, my mother said, stretching. Let's finish up. Emily, you can start with the dishes. I looked at her, really looked at her, and for just a second, something flickered across her face, confusion, maybe because my expression hadn't changed, but the air had. Yes, I said calmly. I will. Not because I had to, but because this was the last time they would ever mistake my patience for permission. As I turned toward the sink, I felt it settle in my chest, solid, unshakable. I was done waiting for respect. The next thing I did wouldn't be loud, it wouldn't be dramatic, but it would be legal, it would be final. And once I took that step, there would be no going back for any of us. I waited until the house had fully settled into its usual rhythm, the television murmuring in the living room, my father half asleep in his chair, my sister scrolling through her phone like the evening had been nothing more than entertainment. I stood at the kitchen counter, drying my hands slowly, feeling strangely steady. Emily, my mother said without looking up, don't forget to lock up before you go to bed. I nodded. I won't. Then I did something I had never done before. I went to my room and closed the door. Inside, I sat on the edge of my bed and opened my laptop. My fingers didn't shake. I wasn't angry anymore, not the kind of anger that makes you reckless. This was different. This was clear. I opened an email draft I had started weeks ago but never sent. At the top was a name my family barely remembered asking about, Daniel Moore, a legal aid attorney, and an old friend. I typed carefully, sticking to facts. No emotion, no accusations, just dates, documents, and questions. I need to confirm my rights and next steps regarding an asset I'm legally responsible for. I believe there may be assumptions being made that don't align with the paperwork. I attached the scanned documents. Read the email twice, then once more. Before sending, I paused not out of doubt, but out of finality. This wasn't revenge. This wasn't punishment. This was protection. I clicked send. The quiet that followed felt heavier than any argument I had ever imagined. I lay back on my bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the familiar sounds of my family moving through the house, completely unaware that something fundamental had just shifted. Down the hall, my sister laughed at something on her phone. My parents talked about how successful the evening had been, and I realized something that made my chest tighten not with fear, but with relief. For the first time in my life, I hadn't asked for permission. Whatever happened next would happen because I chose myself. I turned off the light and closed my eyes. Christmas dinner was over. But the consequences were only just beginning. The shift didn't happen with shouting or slammed doors. It happened with a phone call the next afternoon. I was in my room, sitting on the bed with my laptop open, when my mother's voice cut through the hallway, sharp, uncertain. "Emily?" she called. "Can you come here for a minute?" That alone was unusual. She didn't usually ask. I walked into the living room and immediately felt it. My father was standing instead of sitting. My sister had stopped scrolling. My mother was holding her phone in both hands like it might bite her. "There's a question," my mother said carefully. "About some paperwork." I stayed quiet. "A lawyer called," my father added, his voice tense. "He said he represents you." Ashley frowned. "What lawyer? For what?" I looked at all three of them. Really looked. For the first time, they weren't relaxed. They weren't confident. They weren't smiling. "He asked about the trust," my mother continued, her tone tight. "The one your grandmother set up. He said we don't have authority over it." The room felt smaller suddenly. "That can't be right," Ashley said quickly. "Mom? Dad, she doesn't even—" "She does," my father interrupted, his voice low. "The documents say her name, not ours." Silence dropped like a weight. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse anyone. I simply said the truth. I never transferred control. I was advised not to. My mother stared at me as if seeing a stranger. You went behind our backs?" I met her gaze. I protected myself. Ashley stood up, anger flashing across her face. "After everything we do for you? This is how you repay us?" I didn't answer her. I didn't need to, because for the first time, they understood something they had never believed before, that I wasn't dependent on their approval, that I wasn't trapped, that the role they had assigned me only existed because I had accepted it. My father exhaled slowly, rubbing his temples. My mother sat down hard on the couch. The house, usually so full of noise and direction, had gone completely still. No one laughed. No one whispered. And suddenly, no one was telling me what to do. I stood there for a moment longer, then turned and walked back toward my room, not in defeat, but in certainty. They didn't call after me, and that silence told me everything I needed to know. That night, I packed a small bag, not in anger, not in a rush, just calmly, deliberately, like someone who finally understood they were allowed to leave. No one stopped me. My mother stayed in the living room, staring at the television without really watching it. My father avoided my eyes. Ashley shut her bedroom door a little too loudly, the sound sharp but empty. I stood in the hallway for a moment, looking at the walls that had watched me grow up believing love had to be earned through obedience. Then I picked up my bag and walked out. The air outside was cold and clean. For the first time that Christmas, I took a full breath. The weeks that followed weren't easy, but they were honest. I stayed with a friend, then found a small place of my own. I met with a legal counselor who explained my options clearly, patiently, without judgment. For the first time, I wasn't being talked over, I was being listened to. I also started therapy not because I was broken, but because I was tired of carrying wounds I didn't cause. I learned that silence can be survival, but boundaries are healing, that family doesn't get unlimited access to you just because they share your last name. My parents reached out eventually. Short messages, careful words. My sister didn't, at least not yet, and that was okay. I didn't need apologies to move forward. I needed peace. That Christmas dinner taught me something I wish I'd learned sooner. Being quiet doesn't mean you are weak, and standing up for yourself doesn't make you cruel. Sometimes, the bravest thing you can do isn't to shout or fight. It's to calmly choose yourself. and walk away, and that choice changed everything.